Hey there. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Stop LAPD Spying Coalition Power Not Paranoia webinar series. And believe it or not, this is our 33rd webinar, part 33. So we've been at it for 33 weeks since late March. And our goal has been to continue, reaching out and building with the community. We were meeting every Tuesday in person at LA Can in Skid Row, but with the pandemic, we had to change gears and get into like this virtual conversation. Um, and yes, with everything that we lose in the process, it's still an opportunity to continue building and have these conversations. Today is our first Tuesday webinar, and the first Tuesday of the month is committed to looking at the police state, the national security police state, and how it intersects with gender and sexuality. And the second Tuesday is how it intersects with the war on youth that is being waged, how youth fall into this broader police state. Third Tuesday is our general meeting, and the fourth Tuesday is around data-driven policing. A couple quick logistical things. Folks, when they chimed in, their mics were muted, and there's a reason for that. We don't want to police and stop anybody from sharing what they want to do. It needs to be an open and a comfortable flow of conversation, but we have been Zoom bombed. So we've had our little share of untoward kind of incident as well. So anytime folks want to make a comment or a question, please, there's a raise your hand feature in there as well, or just put it in chat. The chat is also limited, so it's not for people amongst people and everyone either. So because we have been zoomed out to chat as well. And this is going to be recorded. This is going to be available for the community on our website by Thursday afternoon. So the previous 32 webinars are already at stoplapdspying.org /webinars. And with that, I am going to hand it over to our host for the evening, Chella Coleman.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on this weirdly familiar Tuesday. I would like everybody to just join me in a collective breath for yourselves right now, because we are doing some very important work just by showing up. So on a count of three, take a breath in. 1, 2, 3. And then let it out. Release anything you need to let it go for the night. We're gonna get into some heavy topics, some violence, some things around being trans and queer and a person of color and indigenous and other intersecting marginalized identities tonight. Especially dealing with the elections, right? And I've just been seeing, I pulled together this group of people that, I'm gonna be real, they're my friends. And a lot of them I've actually either worked beside or I've seen their work on Facebook. And so I'm going to introduce them to you. And the first person I'm going to introduce is Chanel. Chanel, I remember my first time seeing them. They were in one of the only times I've ever gone to the LA Police Commission, and they were on fire. They lit me up, and it was just amazing. They do a lot of work around electoral politics and being Black and disabled. So welcome, Chanel.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. You're welcome. The next person I'm gonna also invite is Jade. Jade is also a personal friend of mine. We've been doing work for about 6 years now, 7 years. We started doing the takeover of City Hall, decolonize City Hall, with Black Lives Matter, and then we just, we've branched out and done other things together, and they're an amazing artists, and they work with Black queer migrants. And that's just, another marginalized identity. So welcome everybody, Jade. Okay, and then Joey. is a person that I've just gotten to know in the last year. They're a Native Indigenous person from Colombia with roots in the Pijao tribe. They taught me a lot. They have opened my eyes to a lot of colorism and especially things that go on in the Latinx/Indigenous Native communities, and especially with queer and trans people. So, and their pronouns. I forgot to do pronouns. Chanel goes by they, right? You can unmute. Unmute yourself, but we can't hear you. We cannot hear you. All the panelists,
it
can you
accidentally
unmute?
it accidentally right-clicked. She or they, it's fine.
Okay, great. And Jade, you go by she and they, right? As well?
I accept all pronouns.
Okay, great, great. And then Joey, what are your pronouns?
I accept every pronoun as well.
Okay, thank you. And welcome, welcome. And our last panelist is Celestria, who I've been doing work with on the streets for a while as well. They're brown, Central American, trans femme, and they do a lot of like archiving, you know, especially archiving movements of trans people of color and queer people of color, especially when it comes to the youth and migrant and Black folks, right? And they just are down they're down to do anything. I just hit them up 2 days ago about this, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. And so just welcome Celestial, everybody.
Hi everyone, my name is Celestial. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Okay, I'm sorry, I said she and they, right? I'm so sorry.
No, you didn't. I'm just letting people know.
I thought I did, but it's okay. Great, thank you. Okay, we are gonna get into the rich conversation. I am the host, Chella, as y'all know. If y'all don't know me, look me up. I'm tired. I'm joking. I've been doing work in Skid Row. I'm currently not in Skid Row, not my normal home. But I've been doing a lot of work with intersecting identities, and especially with Black trans women specifically. So yeah, and that's just me. I'm the facilitator tonight. So my first question is going to be for Jade. Okay. I gotta look up the questions I thought of for you. So what is the overall what's been going on, especially specifically with visibility and non-visibility with Black queer migrants specifically, and especially with like COVID, pre-elections. Let's talk about that first. So what's been going on?
Okay. Well, a lot has been going on, you know, pre-pandemic, pre-Trump, right? And at first, I'll talk a little bit around who I work with. It's the BLMP, the Black LGBTQ Migrant Project. And it's, you know, a project that started around 2.5 years ago. We're fiscally sponsored by the Transgender Law Center, but have grown a lot this year. I work with them as communications organizer, and I've been there for about 5 months now, but worked with them in a volunteer capacity beforehand. So it's a regional organization. We have regional hubs in New York, Houston, the Bay Area, the DMV area, and a couple other places. And I'm sorry I'm blanking, but you can find that information on blmp.org. And just continuing to reach out definitely across borders. We have members and folks in Honduras and Brazil, in Mexico and different places wherever the diaspora is, so as well as the Caribbean. So a lot of things have been going on. I think we'll just talk about, you know, first the erasure of Black migrants. When we talk about immigration, when we talk about migrant struggle, it's usually very separated from a brown experience and a Black experience. And the Black one is, you know, usually not referenced, if at all. And so that's the first and largest challenge and obstacle, especially in the movement, right, where the voices and the experiences of Black, trans, and queer migrants are not even touched upon. There's no support. There's no real support there as well, right? So I think that's the largest issue of the erasure, and we see that in in all realms of social justice and all realms of experience. Black trans femmes, Black queer people, and especially Black people that live in colonized countries are going to be the ones that are usually first and worst impacted, as well as the indigenous population of that area. So those are the challenges with that. And so with that, we're seeing this year alone, we saw in June, there were substantial changes that were made to the asylum seeking process. And I'll actually go into that as well. So what we saw in June and what I'm sure we'll see more of is pretty much the forced migration, the continued legacy of colonization and slavery of Black African people, the diaspora, right, where people are forced to move because of, sanctions, because of economic war, just attempted genocides and all the different ways that they show up, right, societal and cultural harms that are done from, intercommunal violence that we see here against Black, queer, and trans folks. And so we're seeing this forced migrations of folks because of US imperialism and the state sanctioned persecution and violence that forces many people to migrate here, right? So some of the things we'll see in these proposed changes to the US asylum system is that it would change the categories of who could request asylum based on persecution, which will specifically affect queer asylum seekers, right? There's another that would bar asylum seekers who travel through other countries from requesting asylum. So this will especially affect folks from African, do I need to wrap it up? Okay, give me like a 1 minute, because I could talk. But getting through this, this is substantial, right? Because a lot of countries from Africa have to stop, right, before going into the U.S. So that will bar a lot of folks from Africa to be able to seek asylum to come here. It will make it harder for asylum seekers who have criminal convictions. And we know that that's straight up going to affect Black folks. That's straight up going to affect sex workers, trans and queer folks who are criminalized by every system on this earth, right, from being able to seek asylum. We know that people who are coming from countries with high COVID numbers now may not be able to apply for asylum. And we know that that's direct imperialism, as we have white colonial settlers traveling, spreading COVID, right, on all these flights in these countries and then leaving. And now we're barring these people from seeking safety. Asylum cases can now be thrown out without hearings. And then we also are not sure if these proposed asylum rules will be retroactive. And so if it is retroactive, how retroactive will that be? And what would that process even look like? So speaking of asylum, we had a campaign for several years, because I want to name a victory, right? Where Zaza, Jennifer Codner, is a Black trans woman from Jamaica, excuse me. And she's been locked in cages for almost 10 years, right? Close to 4,000 days, criminalized through the policing system and then sucked into the deportation machine. And so BLMP has been working really hard to try to get Zaza out, and she has been released. She was released last week. So like a major victory. She is resting and recovering somewhere safe as of now. And if you want to know more how you can plug in and support her as she recovers, and I'm sure the fight is not over. We also got word that the federal government might appeal that asylum. So the fight isn't over. They gave her a fucking, ankle bracelet, all the things. So if you want to sign up for BLMP's mailing list at blmp.org, we will definitely, and also our social medias will be showing, telling folks how they can plug in with that. So that's substantial. Another thing are the changes to the TPS, and that also, TPS is temporary protected status that folks can, that they can receive here. And there are a lot of people that are under TPS that live and work in the US for years. A lot of people were given TPS as children. And so those changes are also substantial, and they definitely affect particularly people migrating from Haiti as well, in different Caribbean places. So I'll pause there. And then, just the note on how policing and immigration and detention go hand in hand. You're first criminalized by the local policing, you're thrown in jail, and they're working directly with ICE agents. They're working directly with, Homeland Security to put you into that deportation machine. So those things are inextricable. And also, we always must name U.S. imperialism as really the driving force of that. And I'll go further, just the colonial imperial system that's driving this. I'll stop there.
I should have given a disclaimer, everyone, that two of our panelists, Jade and Celestial, have to leave early. So I'm going to actually interview them side by side together, and then to let them leave when they need to. So I'm going to continue with Jade. Jade, okay. So I'm going to go to my next question. Actually, I'm skipping because you just kind of answered the first two in one, so that's great. The second question is, with the roadblocks of not being able to vote, right? Especially for undocumented folks, right? What is there like this fear? And if so, what trends are going on in the Black migrant, Black queer and trans community that you've seen?
Trends around elections or around
elections, electoral politics?
Well, I'm seeing, I've seen a lot, right? I think in this moment, this year, this election, it caused the question for folks doing this work around, I think, the futility of participating, but also the wins and the strategic ways in which we can vote, right? In the ways that I've seen a lot of people doing specific campaigns for Black trans and queer folks to be included. But, I think, to be clear, like, BLNP is an abolitionist organization. And so we're calling on ICE to be abolished. We're calling on police to be abolished. We're calling on the state to be abolished, right? In the long term. And so what does that mean in the short term? What are the local, people, the judges, right? Jackie Lacey, who are the people that we want to target locally and in our cities and our regions that can very well be removed, and that can definitely create more space for us to be able to get people out of cages, to get, to get, children not being separated at the borders. This has been ongoing, right, before Trump. It's just gotten real nasty and real obvious with Trump, but this has been happening. And so I think the question is, what is their end goal, right? I'm seeing a lot of trends of folks trying to provide a space because migrants can't vote, right? Most migrants can't vote. So it is something where it's an appeal of getting demands. And that is really, I think, the onus and the responsibility is on folks who are pushing electoral politics. So we're seeing these mega nonprofits, seeing these huge new coalitions that are pushing, electoral politics, which are important, but are erasing the needs and the demands of migrants, and specifically Indigenous, Black, queer, and trans migrants, who are just completely left out of the conversation, right? Also separating ICE and police. I was actually on a call with a major immigration organization in the US, and they were like, okay, yeah, we say abolish ICE, but we can't say abolish police. And we were like, what do you mean? They're like, well, we just can't say abolish police, but you cannot separate the systems, right? You can't, they're different mechanisms, the same systems, we all know this. And I think that, I'll try to keep my personal politics out of this. I think, just to be clear, as an abolitionist, I think that there's strategic ways for us to get some wins, for us to, we called on some lawmakers in Colorado to support us in getting Zaza out, and they did, right? Because of their support, we were able to get her out. So there are ways that we can use this system to try to get some people out of cages, try to get some people the support and resources they need. But we're not going to vote our way to freedom. We're not going to vote our way to liberation. We're not going to vote away our borders and the system of policing that we live under. So I think that's what I would say about that.
You touched on it. I was just going to actually, and I know this wasn't in the question, you just added to the question. And it's something that I realized, right? Like the anti-Blackness within undocumented movements, right? This good immigrant versus bad immigrant narrative, right? Black immigrant, real talk. But good immigrant versus bad immigrant, narrative, or this like, we come to this country to work, and versus
is using the system.
Right. And those things are valid, right? I'm not trying to disrespect folks who feel that way, but they don't think about or challenge the anti-Blackness that comes along with, right? And especially like when we're thinking of like, I specifically asked about trends, right? Because like I wanted to like, get, hear some things around like what are folks feeling right now, right? Like I know my own feeling towards electoral politics, even with my privilege of being born of this nation. I don't think it's real. it's especially with the electoral college being still there and being a part of this racist institution, and so it's still xenophobic. So I just wanted to bring that up. I think it's amazing, and I think thank you for acknowledging that. Mm-hmm. My last question, and then you can say whatever the freak you want to before you head out. Okay.
I don't have to leave like 7, so but I'm really wanting to hear other people.
Yeah. How can folks support Black undocumented folks right now, specifically, especially because like people are gearing up. Let's just keep it real. People are gearing up. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had on the phone this morning. 3. With people that are like, yo, there might be a civil war, because if Trump's elected, this and this and that. And if Biden's elected, this and this and that. So like, what are the ways, number one, that fear is being shown in reality for these folks? And how can folks that are that have the privilege of being born of this nation, like myself, how can we support and how can we, have these conversations?
That's a big question. I think it's, it goes from how can you materially support? Open that purse. If you have wealth, especially living in the US, we have so much more proximity to wealth. And it's hard for me to say wealth, in this country because it's so fucking, what a big gap. But, we have such proximity to money and resources here, things, right? More so than people outside of these borders. And especially Black, queer, and trans, Indigenous folks outside of these borders. And so I think the best way is to see how you can support opening that purse up, right? Do your research, find people that are doing on the ground work, in the field work. We have folks that are working to get masks out into I forgot their name, so I'm not gonna butcher it, but an indigenous community in Brazil. I will put it in the chat because I'm gonna look it up. Also, the Garifuna people in Honduras are also a Black indigenous group of folks that are indigenous to Honduras, and there's a lot going on that you can plug into as well. There's people that need sponsorship, right? So what happens when you get asylum? What happens when you're released from detention, but you don't have somewhere to go? People need a sponsor. Open up your homes. You have an extra room, you have an extra, like a spot in the basement, open up your home so folks can stay. I think that, those are some concrete ways. Plug into a Black-led migrant organization, an Indigenous-led, trans-led, femme-led organization that is helping folks on the ground and not just doing that, that all that talking, all that posting. I think that being very clear around it being US imperialism, I think we're seeing a lot of things, and I don't hear imperialism too much, and I don't hear colonial settlerisms, that's whatever, settlerism, I don't know. I don't hear that too much. So making sure that we're being very clear when we're having those conversations. We know that people that are living under this have, you know, so many different obstacles. They have the big puppet masters, right? The colonial puppet masters that are making huge impacts the day to day with the push of a button with the sign of a paper miles away, right? So you have these big boogeymen that are doing, you know, all these different sanctions, embargoes, and acts of genocide upon people. You have the local and state police of that area that have been, you know, financed and that are being directed by these puppet masters. And then we have your community members, right? So we see with the Kakuma camp in Kenya, the Block 13 in the Kakuma camp in Kenya is an LGBTQ group. There's about 182 queer refugees there, mostly from Uganda, that are being attacked, brutally assaulted, both by the people inside of the camp, but also from the UN headquarters. They called police, tear gassed them when they went to get safety. They're demanding to be released from this camp, that the UN helps them find somewhere else that is safe for them. They're asking for donations. I can drop all those links in the chat so you guys can open that purse up and provide what resources you have. And I think, you know, a lot of folks here, you know, aren't the ones, you know, where I'm saying, open up your house, open up your purse, but, you know, a little bit goes a long way. And then of course, passing this information on. So there's definitely, you know, so many ways to plug in. I think listening to Black trans femmes, also not just focusing on the death, the pain, and the, you know, the targeting, but also ways that you can bring joy into their lives, ways that you can, you know, give, as Chella says, give them their roses while they're still here, ways to celebrate Black transness, Black queerness, ways to celebrate and undo the anti-Blackness in your own family, in your own community. And that's that real important work, because we're really trying to change the fabric of the way the society moves, which is based on anti-Indigenous, anti-Blackness, anti-queerness. And center Black TGNCI liberation, center it. What does that look like? And then Blackify your understanding of migration, understand what's going on, understand that there's so many Black people that are also held in detention centers, so many Black trans and queer people who are facing the brunt of violence all around them. And just, yeah, research, do your work, and connect with folks who you can see that on the ground. And I think those are ways that you can support.
Please, Jade, can you do us a favor and link your organization coalition down in the chat for us?
Yeah.
So that we can see, and we can also like do what we need to do. Other thing is, what else do you want?
Quickly, if you could just make sure that you select everyone. So, because otherwise, oh yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Hamid, I'll be on the Zoom. I'm like a proficient as fuck with this shit now, but thank you.
I think we're all suffering from some kind of Zoomitis. So.
Right.
What else do you want folks to know in closing before we move on to our next panelist?
I think that's it for now. I'd love to hear what other folks have to contribute, and then I'll drop in those links I mentioned in the chat. And then I'll also drop my email in the chat if people want to directly tie me in. There's several different ways to join and be sponsorships, be a sponsor of Black migrants. And so if it's not you, if it's someone you know that might be able to do that financially, or it's not just finances, it's also doing, you know, calls, making calls, writing out scripts, doing, you know, making sure that they have what they need when they get out, other things. So if you do want to be a sponsor, there's ways to plug in to do that. We have something called the Malika Network, and it's stipended to be pretty much a group that is focused on supporting Black, queer, and trans migrants. And I can drop in those application for that as well. So
thank you.
I did have something to add. But yeah.
Jade Daniels, everybody. Okay. So our next panelist, yes, give them the roses, is Celestial. Can you unmute yourself and get ready for the questions?
Hi. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me. But also second, I'm open to staying till 7:30 so that there can be like a more, I guess, like themed conversation happening between
Okay.
everyone because I think that like I just want like multiple perspectives happening at once versus just like
Okay.
everyone listening to me over and over again. You know what I mean?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But Jade, you were amazing. I loved hearing all of what you had to say. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So that will be the so like I'll ask you a question and move on to the next panelist to include y'all. So y'all get ready. Chanel and Gwende, get ready. Okay. All right.
What's the
So
question, Stella? What you got for us?
okay. So I'm actually just gonna open up with asking kind of the similar question about what are the trends, especially with your archiving right now, right? Because you've been archiving for a minute. And you were just at our protest a few weeks ago. So what are the trends that you see, not just within, you know, not just within the violence of our community, but within the resilience of our community?
You know, I just want to say that the trends, I guess, you know how you say like the more you attract the people that you want in your life, right? And so like I've had like the privilege to only stay connected to folks who are very consistent in showing up for Black, Indigenous, queer and trans liberation and undocumented disabled, all these like intersections. So I feel really honored that I continue to cultivate these spaces that I'm a part of. And so something that I have noticed particularly that although the communities that I encompass want an abolition of the state, some folks are like all of a sudden are very hopeful for the state, and I don't necessarily know how to feel about it. You know, because I want to hold on to these complexities and not necessarily invalidate people's experiences with them using the state as a way to feel like there is hope. And at the same time, I also think that it's a bit disrespectful to the ways that they encompass particular politics of abolition, but then still participating in the state. So I don't know, like I've been seeing a lot of folks be more hopeful about the way that politics can support us, specifically US sanctioned politics. And it's just something that I've noticed more recently. And like it's been a trend that I've seen queer and trans people being like, yes, please go vote. Yes, please participate. Because I don't want to like misappropriate like Angela Davis, right? But she is currently saying things along the lines of, you know, yes, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house and things like that. But at the same time, where it's a responsibility to use like the political system to engage in the world. And so I think that is sort of also like excusing folks' participation in the state. So what I'm noticing is a trend that like these political figures that encompass abolition are yet at the same time urging people to vote. So that's sort of what I've been noticing right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Chanel, are you ready?
Huh?
Same question for you, including um, the invisibility of disabled folks, right? Especially disabled Black and trans and queer folks. Like, what what is what's what is it looking like with the electoral politics right now? And what are some things that because I know that you've been doing a lot of work on like calling in and getting people to vote for certain people and certain measures. What is the engagement looking like when you encounter it and from your own perspective and experience?
Oh, it's pretty darn stressful. Like I'm losing respect for people left and right. And I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm just keeping it 100. Like, of course, I do stuff inside of electoral politics where necessary. I hold a ridiculous amount of titles that mean I have a ridiculous amount of work that I'm not getting paid for because of the party I'm part of. In either cases, it's like I completely understand the supposed contradictions of an abolitionist such as myself, willingness to work inside of a system that exists in the state. I understand how that is a contradiction. However, because of the fact that I recognize if you're trying to do a certain thing and the ground is too hard, if you're trying to till the ground and it's too hard and you literally can't like break it because there's nothing to help you, if I can make that ground fucking wet and like malleable, I'm supposed to do that. If it's what I need to do to make sure we can plant this food, that's what I'm supposed to do. So for me, it's like electoral work is kind of, it's stressful and it's confusing because people, their mind is focused on the wrong part of it. People that are not, you know, marginalized the way that queer and trans and disabled people are. Because one of the most irritating things in the world to me, and I could just be not understanding the situation, but most people, they haven't, working class people like us don't always have the time to look into how these things are connected to one another. I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean, because the scariest thing in the world happened when the scariest thought in the world came to me when one of my friends decided to run for something called Railroad Commission. Now in Texas, they've got something called a Railroad Commissioner, but the Railroad Commissioner in Texas has not handled railroads in dozens, well, in a couple of decades at least. The Railroad Commissioner position is the person that regulates the oil industry. But because, you know, working class rural people in Texas just look at the title of the position, they're like, oh, conductor regulations. It doesn't matter who wins that. So you've got two people that are completely owned and not in the fun way by the oil industry, running against an environmentalist that's been fighting them for years. But because she is running in a non-traditional party and no one knows what the Railroad Commission does, and I supposedly can't find information on this candidate, even though she's the best person for the job, who also wants to abolish the state, she's not getting the attention necessary. So often what happens, and the reason electoral politics is stressful, is because when activists take the time to ruin their life by running for office, people do not even consider the experience of the activists to be valuable in the electoral sphere. But the other issue, and the most annoying thing with that, is people have not thought about how the cities, regardless of where they are built in reference to people that are disabled. No one seems to understand how the different things that we experience as disabled people, as queer people, are affected by even the simplest of laws. Example, the bullcrap that Buscaino tried to pull last week. If that ordinance for the update to 4118 passes as it's written, which is again stuff more normal people don't pay attention to because city council meetings are long and who cares about local politics. If that passes the way that it was written, I would have gotten 4 tickets in one day because I walked half a mile, and uphill means I have to stop and rest. But that's freaking illegal, even for like 2 minutes, because the disrespectful person who runs most of the city council is like, we can't let people sit down because homeless people, unhoused people may sleep. And that, we just can't have that because it's a bad look for the city. And I'm just over here like, y'all are the city council. You have an ability, you can stop rents right now. And apparently y'all can endorse congressional legislation. So why are you not telling all of our freaking representatives that they, because they are representing LA, need to be in support of the bill that would literally freaking federally make public housing a thing that can happen immediately? I understand that it's a long, arduous road, this whole electoral politics nonsense. It is stressful for most people. A lot of people get upset. They throw their phones, they throw their laptops. They say, I can't F this crap, I'm out a lot of the time. But for me and for a lot of people, because I've taken the time to, my whole thing for as long as I've been a giant kid has been, I need to know how stuff works. If I just know why this works like this, it can make sense and no one can call me stupid. So that is kind of how I approach most things. And if A equals, like if A plus B lines over here and makes C happen, then if I know that the freaking board of supervisors has the power to regulate the sheriff, the head of the sheriff's department, but now because we're asking them to do something about this corrupt fool, they're trying to take away our right to vote for him, that's a problem. And now, you know, I don't trust the entire board of supervisors. But for me, I've always been taught, and maybe it's just a flaw in my design, but for me, I'm supposed to fight in any way that I know how to make things better for people. Electoral politics is one part of the work that we have to do as activists. One part. It's not even the first part of things you need to do. You're not supposed to electoral politics and then I'm done. That is, that word is ableist. That word is ableist. What's a word that's not ableist that means, can't think of it, but you know which word I'm thinking about. It's like your last step is not supposed to be electoral politics. That's like a freaking, let me move this penny over. You are supposed to also be, you know, in contact with whatever, you're supposed to be in contact with whomever like grassroots organization is doing the real work. I do work in electoral politics a lot, but I do as much real work as I can. The reason I bury myself in legislation and bury myself in city council ordinances is because I need to understand how this stuff works so I can be able to explain it to other people if I gotta. I mean, one thing that really pisses me off about activists in general, they don't understand how to talk to people in a way that is understandable. Like, why do you guys insist on thinking that everyone should speak like Karl Marx? Like, I need you to understand that no one has time to read freaking Blockchin or freaking Engels within their spare time. We are out here trying to survive. Have I read Marx? Of course I have. But you know what? Everyone can't read Marx. If you don't know how to put what you're trying to tell somebody into plain language, that even someone with the intellectual or developmental disability, and I have no idea why they call them that, can understand it, you're not doing your job right. I don't care if you're trying to do electoral politics. If you have not prioritized making sure that whatever you're telling someone, whatever you're trying to get someone to do, whether you're trying to get them to run for city council or vote for city council or even understand Prop freaking 17, if you can't explain that stuff in a way that a 4-year-old can understand, what are you doing? Stop, take a break, sit down, sit with yourself. Sit with yourself and think about how you present information. I don't mean to be angry, but I'm pissed off because the amount of books that I've had to have people shove at me, and I'm like, well, what does this mean? I know what it means, but because I have to explain this stuff to people under the age of 10, because I'm the outreach and accreditation chair of our youth caucus, I'm gonna need you to make that super simple so that everyone understands. Because here's the thing about education and activism that is sometimes missing in electoralism. People forget, if you don't have the foundation of whatever ideology you are trying to put to that, whatever legislation, whatever reason that you're in this electoral, you literally, you have to, if people don't understand what you're trying to say or do, you're not going to be successful in doing that. The ideology doesn't matter if it don't make sense. I mean, ideology is nice, but if you can't put that into practice, what are you doing? We cannot spend all our time on freaking Twitter. We have stuff to do, work to do. People are dying. That is the other reason that I'm upset with people electorally, because I'm over here like, look, y'all said y'all not about US imperialism. I do not care how scared of Trump you are. You're in California. There is no reason for any activist who claims to be not about imperialism and who votes, because not every activist does, and not every activist needs to, because the voting system is incorrectly written. But, you know, the Constitution wasn't made for us anyway. I've dealt with that stress on that already. My issue there, though, is how you gonna call yourself a person in solidarity with a me and vote for someone that is legitimately gonna ensure that people who look like me and who look like my roommate and who freaking protect like my other roommates deserve to have bombs dropped on their heads, because that's basically what you do when you're voting for Biden or Trump. You're saying that people who look like me, who pray like me, deserve to die because they're not here on this stolen land that they call the United States. I cannot, with people in California where you have 2, 3, none, you have at least 2 anti-imperialist choices on the ballot. If you must get your ballot on, how you voting for a Democrat or Republican when you know they're gonna keep blowing us up? Oh, you don't care because the bombs are not dropping in America yet? Fuck you, dude. I'm sorry, I've been holding that one in all day. I apologize. Ooh, can't hear you.
Oh, I was agreeing with you, boo, and thank you for all of that. I mean, I was texting the Hobbit being like, yes, that's what you. When I did this, that was like, yes. Okay, Dwinda, are you ready? Okay. First introduce yourself. You have something prepared you wanted to say?
Yes. Imanaja mashikuna, yukaka joy mikani, yukaka tolima pakur kukuna mantamikani, yukaka pihama majakta mantamikani. Hello friends, my name is Joey. I belong to the ethnic group Bihao. We're a southwestern Andean community in Colombia. I am currently living in diaspora on Seminole Miccosukee land, or as they know as Kayelale. If any of y'all are in the United States, I definitely recommend looking what territories you reside on. You can find it on natives-lands.ca. And yeah, that's all I want. Oh, and I want to also recognize that not just that we're on indigenous land, but also that Black people around the United States, around the Americas, are also displaced indigenous people. And so we should also honor them as indigenous people. Thank you.
With that being said, I should have remembered that we are actually in LA. Folks are in LA. We are on Tongva and Keachland. So that's something I wanted to remember. So thank you for bringing that to us, Joey. Joey. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to be the trifling person I am, y'all. So Joey, it's kind of the same. Like, what are the trends that you are seeing, especially within the Native Indigenous communities and voting?
Well, there's depending on which side you're looking at it. Of course, in 2016 there was the voting restricting rights that were happening in Lakota land, and so there's been a push for Indigenous people to vote. Unfortunately, what does this mean is that there has been a commodification of what is resistance, what is decolonization, and so now there's a push for Native people to vote for the establishment, to kind of assimilate, and they're using even using tools within capitalism to upsell this like I guess you can say this noble savage stereotype of like, oh, the native that votes, native voting is sacred, and things like that. So these are the trends I've been looking at in the United States. It's just a push for Native people to kind of assimilate with the establishment.
I'm sorry. That was real. Like, I just saw like a lot of snap videos on Facebook with like Indigenous Native femmes and other folks being like, go vote, and they had it on their cheek and they had their palms up, like the whole like native thing. It was just like, yeah.
Yeah, I think briefly touching bases on what Joey said, I've seen a lot of propaganda on Instagram saying that 45% of Latinx people don't vote or something like that, and so we should go out there and like contribute to the Latinx vote. And I'm just like, okay, well, most of the Latinx people who vote are fucking Republicans and like want Trump in office. So why the fuck do I give a fuck about the Latinx vote? And so it just reminded me about what Joey said in terms of sort of like a co-optation of native like linguistics and it being used as a way to uplift capitalism and electoral politics.
Oh shit. I'm sorry. I'm a mess. Okay. So actually, that brings me to my next question, Celestial. Are you ready? What do you think it would look like if we had someone that was BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, person of color, or a QTPOC, queer, trans, person of color, in the White House, and also like these local legislation, like creating these laws? What do you think it would look like?
Like rainbow capitalism. Like it'll look like we're queer, we're here, and we love the establishment. That's what it looks like, I don't know. It's like, I really just want to sort of honor what Chanel said, like you mentioned something about like the ground being so hard and the ground being so difficult to work on. And so like, if we are on the ground, like I'm sure as fuck gonna make it malleable and like in a way for folks to flourish. And, I think that holds a lot of truth to it, particularly because for example, the bill that just passed in California, AB 2218, it's a bill essentially that's going to, I think, give $250,000 to transit organizations in California. And there's like sort of like restrictions to it. The organization has to be 60% transgender serving. And so I don't know, like I would want to think that a QT BIPOC person in office would make it so that we all have sustainable tools to survive. But at the same time, like if you look into the ballot and the quote unquote like presidents running right now, both of them, or some of them don't care for reproductive justice. Some of them don't care for immigrant justice. Some of them don't care for disability justice. And so it's kind of like, if these entities are buying into working against us, then how am I not going to think that a bi QTPOC person going into office isn't going to fall into these traps? I'm not saying that it's not possible that they will work against these traps, but I'm just saying that like as marginalized people, it's a bit difficult for me. And I'm going to say I statements, right? Like I find it difficult to really like have that sort of tangible like action happening where we will be safe, especially in an imperialist nation state, right? So I would hope in a radical future that if by QTPOC people like would run the world, that like essentially it would be returned to indigenous people and there would be no borders, there would be no cages. Black life would be honored, right? Indigenous life would be honored. And yeah, it's sort of like how I feel.
Go ahead, Chanel. You wanted to say something. I see
Yeah,
you
I
about to say
wanted
something.
to say this really quickly. I understand that that's most people's general thought processes, but right now, one of the things I have a privilege of watching is that most of my friends are active in the whole city council situation. And you got a literal activist who is running now to replace David Ryu. And I mean, I don't know much about Nithya Raman personally, but I've been able to see her work over the years. She's taken the time while she's been a candidate and while she's not been a candidate to be there and do what's needed, to explain why things currently aren't working, etc. I've seen this happen when the right kind of person who has the right constitution is running for the right reasons and doing that and has a strong team behind her, you see the change almost immediately in how they interpret policy and what's going on. Now, I haven't looked at how the votes are going, and I hope that she wins, because that would be a major, beautiful thing for CD4. But that's what I'm thinking about. For me, I've seen a lot of activists run for office, and all I could think about is if you got the activists outside over there screaming about what needs to happen in the streets, doing that direct work where there's legislation backing it up because an activist has gotten elected, and they've also, gotten elected in large numbers, you can create what we need as, a society ran by QTPOC people with respect to all these things that we know to be true. I'm seeing it in the strangest places already, not in California, because people have this gotta get that word on my vocabulary. This uncultured notion that the only way to vote is blue, which is a problem, because if you look at the history of that party here, just in the last 8 years, they're kind of why we're effed. But no one understands that just because a Democrat is not a Republican doesn't necessarily mean they got your interest in the right. Ridiculous. I don't understand why people are like this. I'm green. Our freaking presidential candidate is a retired UPS driver and a freaking dump truck driver who both have a firm understanding of anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism, but people are like, I'm not gonna vote for this guy because he's not yelling at me like Bernie Sanders did. And I'm like, well, he has to spend most of the time explaining to you the policies that AOC and them got y'all confused about, but I'm gonna sip tea on that. And it's just kind of frustrating. Over.
Jade, you unmuted yourself, so it sounds like you want to say something.
I wanted to jump on in. Yeah, thank y'all. Y'all are dope. And yeah, I think for me, when I think about this representation, right, it's like the straightest and this is general, right, because there's many truths, but it's like the straightest direction to, your destination is a straight line. And I feel like we've been doing all kind of certain ways to get, it's like if we're getting to revolution, what does it mean to continue to feed into the systems, right? And there's levels to this shit. I think in terms of we're talking about a BIPOC president, I don't give a shit, because any US president is the president of empire, and whatever they do is going to continue to feed that empire and going to continue to kill this earth. I think that we don't have enough time I think it's a strategy, we talk about Black Liberation Army, and I'm sure many others have said, short-term tactics, long-term strategies. And so I definitely think, yes, vote for, I keep messing their name up, Nayitha Raman. Yes, let's look at what is it. And I know I've been in some conversations where they were talking about what does it look like for some of these big, nonprofits to turn into a party, build a new party. And I've heard all these different things, but at the end of the day, we have less than 12 years. And that's, I think, putting it softly, until we can't get back with the planet. If we're talking about climate change, right? And that's another thing on forced migration, is people literally can't, survive in the places that they are indigenous to, or that they migrated to, or that they make a living off of. And so I think that's a question too. So for me, it's like, how much time do we have? We only have so much energy. Where are we putting it? It's lovely to see people doing mutual governing, people squatting, taking places, right, and defending places, people figuring out how to grow food sustainably, how to care for one another and catch babies, and bringing back the ancestors, and doing some, cultural shit that what are the different ways, how to hate to get free, right? What is, they did some real ass ancestral magic. They connected to spirit. It was a lot of them leading that as well. And so that gets erased in the very militant history of that. But, you know, like, what are the different ways? And I think that we can put all of our energy into a candidate we know that, you know, is a good person, that's, you know, has experience, is system impacted, to put them in a spot. Hopefully they don't get their asses worn out, and, you know, maybe we get a bill or two out of it. Took us about 3 to 4 years. Or, you know, like, we divest, right? What does it look like to continue to divest from these systems, divest from, and, you know, definitely more on the larger scale than, you know, city council. I think that's really important and something that we can do. It doesn't take that much energy to shift. We just have to be able to direct, organize in that way. But yeah, I think that it's like, what, you know, to what end? Right, we're gonna be doing all this huffy right now. It's gonna be 4 years later. It's like we catch amnesia every 4 years, and we're like, "Oh, this is the biggest election of our life." And it's like, "Well, I thought the last one was. I thought the one before that was." You know, so it's like, how many directions are we gonna go to get to? You know, we could just kind of go in a straight line, and we already saw, you know, the revolution airy spirit this year with these uprisings. We already saw that America is going to burn, you know what I mean? And it's only a matter of time.
The whole world.
You know what I'm saying? Exactly. And people are revolting. We see how the NPIC, we see how the nonprofit industrial complex has swallowed that momentum. You know, we see how we have so many different, you know, again, yeah, like I spoke to my indigenous homie around the voting is sacred thing, and they were just popping off around it. So like how we're getting commodified and eaten up, right? As we try to participate. So I'm on the divest. Let's build consensus. Let's learn how to stop harming one another intercommunally. Let's learn how to feed ourselves and get healthy and have enough mental, spiritual, and physical health to be in this struggle together, have trust and community together. And yeah, let's get some housing. We got a lot of things that we can work on, and that we are, but I think I would rather put my energy there than in trying to get, you know, another candidate that might look like me and have some of the same experiences in my community, but that, you know, still working within those systems that are trying to kill us. So
as long as the candidate is also doing that work you mentioned, they worth it. That's the reason
that
I'm like,
not negating that at all. Yeah, for sure.
That's the reason that I said it. The first thing I said was that it's one tactic of many. These things literally have to be tied together and done in a sequence, or it's not worth the time at all. I do not want the government to exist. However, I need it right now for survival, because without the government, I don't eat. So I'm gonna do what I know how to make that a little easier and connect those things to the best of my ability, knowing that also everyone that does this, at least in Philly, is also working with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign and like literally taking over buildings the way you're supposed to when you need to get people some housing right now. Tactics. We on the same page, and I love that about this conversation.
Get you fit in, you know, determine your flavor and your role, and let's get to it. I love that. I definitely,
Thank you so much for introducing me to these people, sis.
You're welcome. Okay, so there's a question I wanted to ask Celestial. Are you ready for a question? I know it's kind of getting to your time of leaving.
No, girl, I'm here till it's over. Don't trip.
Okay, so I mean, actually, it's funny because Jade kind of touched on it, and it was one of your questions you wanted me to ask, and I didn't think about it, and that's real. It's environmental racism. How is that being tackled right now? And what do you think it's going to look like? You know, yeah, in the current years.
You know, like it's so fucked up because Black, Indigenous, POC communities are the ones that are experiencing the most harm by climate change. Like we literally don't have good water to drink. We don't have clean water. We don't have clean air. You know, like if I'm outside of my house, like if I run for more than 5 minutes, or if I'm walking outside of my house, I can't catch a breath. Like I live right next to the freeway. I live right next to the 10. And folks that live in Los Angeles in particular, in Tongva territory, if you live in like South LA, Southeast LA, Watts, Compton, all these cities, like you're like stacked in the middle of 4 different freeways, and all these emissions are going into the air and you're breathing that. Essentially, like this idea of urban planning and this idea of development are all like convoluted ways of saying like we want all of you to be pushed out. And so currently right now, you know, there's this huge environmental like waste like area zone in a part of Southeast LA called the Exide plant that was abandoned, and activists tried to like take this plant to court and to like essentially hold Exide accountable to make sure that Exide removes and cleans it and spends their own money, but the court dismissed it, and now quote unquote taxpayer dollars have to pay to clean a site that essentially was cancerous to the communities all over Southeast LA and all over Northeast LA, right? And so I think it's really fucked up because in thinking about this election and thinking about these politics, it's like one candidate is like climate change doesn't exist. We don't know what you're talking about, whatever. The other candidate says we're going to spend $250 trillion addressing climate change. But what does that actually look like? Like, what does it actually look like to address climate change? It looks like, you know, reinvesting resources to support disabled folks who are on oxygen tanks, who can't even breathe because of the environmental disasters that exist in the world, right? And so, I don't know, I think that like, and it's just so difficult to think about how environmental racism will be rectified and how it will be resolved when simple things like Black folks in Flint still don't have drinking water. Indigenous people all over the East Coast are still like have no access to food. So like, how are we going to address these global issues when we're not addressing the very smaller ones that are already affecting us?
They're
Yes,
all really connected, and it sucks because with regard to pollution and environmental racism, it's like the materials needed to make a bomb. One of the things you need to make a metal bend is called chromium. That causes cancer. That stay in the water and the air because they insist on constantly making tanks and stuff. Even your favorite anti-imperialist senator freaking votes to do that just because Vermont needs to have jobs. And I'm over here like, yo, corporate death penalties should be a thing, but also if y'all cared about the environment, you would stop voting to make imperialist bullshit. And I'm just like, how you gonna say you want to save the environment and you care about the planet as you sit here and vote for imperialist bullshit? And I'm just like, this is not okay. I live in East LA. The Exide damage is actually reached Highland Park now, and people who live in Highland Park didn't know that until I told them that a couple of years ago. Our entire water supply has chromium in it because they never stopped doing XYZ. And also the rainwater has plastic. I hate it here because all they have to do is stop doing a thing, but because someone has decided that corporations matter more than human life.
shit. Thank you for saying that, Chanel. Duende. So I want to get back to something y'all started talking about. So those that don't know, a long time ago, like 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I was just watching YouTube just to watch it. And I know it's horrible because the guy like is horrible, but Vice did this thing on like Black Trump supporters versus Black non-Trump supporters. And then there was a connecting video called Latinx, Latinx Trump supporters versus non-Trump supporters that were Latinx. And actually, Joey was a part of that conversation. Joey, when I was watching it and like seeing like the conversation around class thing, like my thoughts came to like class, right? Like number one, colorism in class, right? Like the people on y'all side that were not Trump supporters were all brown. We're all like darker skinned. And I know your class history, so I know that it's been a little bit more, you know, you've been in the struggle, right? Whereas like the other side, they were all like, you know, white passing and, you know, except for that one girl. There was that one girl that was super brown, but, you know, what was your What was your experience on that show?
Well, it was kind of bad, horrible, really, traumatizing, to be honest. It was the first time I was in a big platform like that. Like, I'm one of the founders for Indigenous Peoples Movement, and we're a coalition. We've raised like $60,000 for Indigenous people worldwide, and we do a lot of work, specifically me, in the context of the Andes, just because I really don't like to talk about communities I'm not a part of. And so my focus is on the Andes. How does migration affect the Andes? The how do you go from rural to city and become from indígenas to campesinos, and so these are the things I talk about, and so they invited me over, and it was I knew I was going to meet Latino transporters because in the United States, from a Western perspective, Latinos are just one homogenous group, right? However, I mean, I grew up in Miami part of my life. Once I moved here when I was 10 years old, and I met a community of Cuban Americans, and they called us things like indios, tiraflechas, pataraja. These are all anti-indigenous slurs, and so I learned quickly that these people saw me and my family differently. Right, my brother's nickname in high school was Pocahontas, and so and then there was the anti-blackness that happens in South Florida, right? And so I knew already that Latinos were not a homogenous group. Even though me and my family don't identify as Latinos, we identify as Pijao. Moving to South Florida, we spoke Spanish, right? And so we already bunched into that community. And so within that community, white people or non-Latinos will see us again as the same. And so when I was invited to that panel, I knew what I was going to see. I was going to see poor Latinos who tend to be people of color be against the establishment, and then you're going to see the whiter Latinos be for the establishment, and of course you're going to have the mestizos, who, you know, it's kind of like a flip a coin. You know, they could be for or against depending on their class history and things like that. And so and then once the Vice interview ended, was a target of a lot of hate, right? People threatened to call ICE on me and my family. People, you know, were doing the anti-indigenous slurs, calling me Mexican. Um, so it was just a lot. And then one of the girls there was Colombian, and she's actually from around the same region as me and my family is from. And me and her talked, and she would say things like, "Oh yeah, you're indigenous to Colombia. That's cool, but like, what do indigenous people do in Colombia? What is their contributions to the culture?" And I'm just like, everything about Latin culture is on top of us. Indigenous people, we were here first. We were here for millions of years, and yet they erase us. They ignore us. You know, their favorite musics like cumbias and vallenatos have indigenous roots, indigenous and African roots, which they also conveniently erase. And so my experience with that is very negative. And so today, seeing the elections right happening, and with Joe Biden and Trump, and Joe Biden being called like abuelo and things like that, it's again erasing what indigenous and black people are talking about. Because if you look at Joe Biden and the history Joe Biden has done to Latin America, he has said that he, for example, was the person who was the archetype for something called Plan Colombia. And for those that don't know, Plan Colombia was basically an anti-leftist don't funding of an organization, basically, where they funded paramilitaries in Colombia that killed Black, Indigenous, and rural Colombians. We're talking about 7 million people were displaced because of Plan Colombia, and 200,000 people were killed. And we're still having these conflicts today. And Joe Biden says they want to continue Plan Colombia to other Latin countries. Under Trump, two coups have failed. The Venezuelan coup failed. Guaido is obviously not the president. And when Evo Morales was ousted, again, the United States funded the coup and failed. And so MAS, the leftist movement or the leftist political party in Bolivia, got reelected by the people, right? Because it is an indigenous-led movement over there. And so the United States already failed two coups, in which Joe Biden, I feel like, was going to be worse for Latin America. And yet these conversations are not happening because indigenous people are ignored. How does the United States affect indigenous territories in the United States? Mayas have been migrating to the United States because of the deportations the United States have been doing to Guatemalans who, unfortunately, because they're in a new environment, have to survive, and so they join gangs. Then they get deported to Guatemala, and then they create violence in these communities, and then the indigenous people have to migrate out of these communities, go to United States, and then they're either killed before entering, or they get sent to cages, in which every single indigenous child, every single child that has been killed under ICE has been Maya, came from different Maya communities. However, that again is erased because everyone sees Latinos as just the same. But when we look at migration, the number one victim or the people that are mostly disenfranchised due to migrations are indigenous people and Black people. Yet these are the communities that are ignored because they only want to say that it is the mestizo people that are suffering under this. And yeah, mestizos do suffer. That isn't to say that they don't suffer. However, there's no funding for people to translate into the languages that we speak because they only focus in Spanish. There's no speakers for Creole. There's no speakers for Cachiquel or Quiche or Mam, and in South Florida as well. And so again, it creates this idea that the Latino community are one racial group, one homogenous category, and who suffers under that? Indigenous people and Black people.
Well, thank you. I remember seeing it on Democracy Now. I know, me watch Democracy Now. Wow. I remember seeing the biggest thing when like Trump started separating families was that they would get like folks who were Central American, who are indigenous Central American folks, and they would get them like lawyers or Spanish speaking interpreters without acknowledging that these folks didn't speak that language, right? And he would trip them up, like they would trip them up with the language. It's so gross. And to think about the push out of specifically Native, Indigenous folks and Black folks in these communities. It's so gross.
You also,
Okay.
here, I just want to point out here in Miami, the biggest undocumented organization is run by a white Argentinian who does not represent these communities. And unfortunately, here in Miami, there's a huge disenfranchisement of Haitians getting deported, Haitians and Jamaicans. Yet no one talks about that because, again, it doesn't represent the stories that the political stories that they want to plant, in Miami. Miami is like Latino heaven, right? However, if you look at it, you're going to see indigenous Mayas and Black Caribbean people are disenfranchised, but those stories are never shown.
I kind of have the same question for you that I had for other folks about trans and queer folks in the White House. How do you think it would be changed if we had someone who was Native or Indigenous or Latinx, a darker skin Latinx person? Not no Cameron Diaz Latinx, but actual Latinx person in the White House.
You're asking me, right?
Yes, one day.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't hear. So, my politics do not end at representation politics. I need to have more class solidarity with people, even if they're different racial groups than me. So my politics do not end at someone's race. So if I were to see, for example, Deb Haaland, getting elected into the government, if you look at how she's voting pro Joe Biden. And so me, as someone who's been disenfranchised by Planned Colombia, she is a Native person. Me and her are theoretically the same race. How does that benefit me? It doesn't. You see Julian Castro when he was running for president, and then he's a darker skinned Latino, and he when Elizabeth Warren had that whole fiasco pretending to be Native American, what did he do? He was like, "Oh, I am supporting Elizabeth Warren," and so and we could just look at just how Native people in general have also perpetuated oppression when they live in the global North. There's a detention center in Texas that's funded by an Alaskan tribe, right? So my politics don't end at racial representation, because what ends up happening is you have people of all racial groups having their interests be their class interests, their best interests being their class interests. And you see that replication happening all the time. And so do I think a Native person being president of the United States is going to be better for Native people? No, because when Obama was president, did the Black community get liberation? No, did my community get liberation under Obama? No, he was considered deporter in chief. He deported more people than Trump. And Trump is like aggressively honest about his white supremacy. And so if I see a Native person running for president, I'm not going to support them just because they're Native. Like you have to do more than electoral politics. You have to do the groundwork. And if that means organizing with white people, I'll organize with white people. If that means organizing with different communities, I'll organize with different communities. I mean, my interest has to be with people of the working class, and that involves people of all racial groups.
Thank you. Okay, starting with Jade. What is one final thing you wanna say about everything that we talked about tonight?
I think that the word stands alone. I'm really thankful for all of the contributions. You know, I'm gonna urge folks to take care of themselves in the upcoming tonight and the upcoming weeks. Deplug. You know, it's like almost impossible, right? So I kind of hate when people are like, oh, well, just deplug, but it's like, or unplug. But try to, you know, make sure you ground at least a little bit in nature. That's what I'm leaving with. It's for folks to really try to take care. Wrap your head if you're going on these streets, you know what I'm saying? Like, really try to take care of yourself. And let's get it popping. I'm thankful to be in community with y'all, and yeah, I hope to see you in person.
Radical self-care is an act of revolution.
That's right. Talk to your ancestors, ask for protection. You know what I'm saying? Okay, yeah.
Janelle, go ahead, you next.
I just want to echo that it has been just a whole blessing to be around these wonderful people and like getting their knowledge, because I mean, one of the things that always bothered me was the fact that people can't see the intersections between what the Indigenous, Latinx, and Black communities go through from the immigrant side of things. Like, I've had so many Black people literally tell me, that's not my fight. Me, you, what? And it's just like, I don't know why people are like this, but this is one of those like radical moments of coming together of really just knowledgeable people to get that information out there so that people can understand this situation better. Like, I hate that our minds are so colonized. That is the right word for it. I don't understand why it's so hard for us to stand together where we need to. Class solidarity is one of the things I meant to bring up, but I forgot because passion, like, but also it's just, that's the thing that we need to be working toward as we organize it anyway, because people in the organization structures be a little suspect when they have no understanding of what people have to deal with differently. Perfect example, how most leftists don't respect people that live in rural areas because they are on the misconception that they're like Trump supporters or something just because they might have a gun and drive a pickup truck. Nah, what is wrong with you? I don't know why people are like this, but they stay on some ridiculousness. And I'm hoping that a conversation such as this is what people need to see and hear to understand that their worldview of certain things is off. And I just really appreciated the time spent with you guys, learning from you guys. And I hope that there's going to be like at the end of this, like a full set of links to whatever organizations y'all are involved in, because I couldn't get them on the chat fast enough. Love you. Thank you.
Celestia, you're next.
You know, I just really think about how Black, Indigenous, disabled folks show up for me. And so I just want to keep showing up for them. And so I just like want that to sit with y'all who are who came to the panel to hear us talk, that all these communities are showing up for us. Like, we need to show up for them too. And I think really that's just all I have to say. And thank y'all so much for inviting me and talking and having this speaky, you know.
Duende.
I just want to say, like, always fight for rural communities because rural communities feed us. Never look down on rural communities. It reminds me back home when city people look down on us for being rural. Then we move here, and you see people here also look down on rural people, including rural white folks. But right now, we need to understand that rural people of every racial group, Native, Black, White, Indigenous, etc., have the knowledge of working with the land, and we need that. Especially people who live in the cities who don't know how to survive off the land. We need to understand that we have to learn how to survive on the land as well, because if not, we're going to continue relying on the capitalist agricultural industry that commodifies labor, that relies on the labor of undocumented and indigenous people and black people and the labor force. I'm sorry, and the prison industrial complex that continues feeding. And so we as people who live in the cities have to work with rural people. And so I hope if there's one thing you can take from this is also that to never look down on rural people, because they may not have the resources that city people may have, but they have a lot of wisdom. They have a lot of knowledge. My grandmother didn't go to middle school, didn't go to elementary school. You know, she was a poor indigenous woman in Colombia, and she is the wisest and most intelligent person I know. She can tell me what each plant does for what medicine purposes and things like that. And so in my language, you know, we don't say goodbye, we say see you later or until next time. So kaya kama, everyone.
So thank you all. This is not done yet. For those who need to go. You know, I'm talking about the panelists. Like, I know that Jade had to go and Celestial. We're still gonna have a Q&A, but I'm gonna take some facilitation privilege and actually say some things that came up for me, just being honest. I enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I was going off because like I was getting too excited. And y'all know me, I get excited. And so I can't help but to think about, number one, I'm not in Skid Row right now, right? But like usually I'm calling from Skid Row. I can't help but to think about folks who literally every day on the daily, they are just outside trying to survive, whether they're selling dope on the street or selling cigarettes or getting named for like certain, you know, certain votes things to get money. And they're too busy surviving to be a part of this conversation, right? They're too busy surviving to even know what we're talking about. I loved what Chanel said about accessibility. I have been challenging myself that in the last like 3 or 4 years to think about like the languages that I've learned, the language talks that I've learned. I mean, when it comes to like woke language, especially when it comes to gender and class, right? I can't also help but not to think about the trans Black women that are out on the street right now, that literally have to, you know, they're trying to survive, y'all. And that's why we're here, y'all. These are the people that we're here for. We're here for the future Chelas. We're here for the future Celestials. We're here for the future Chanels and Jades and Duendes and Mayas and Jamies and Arianas. And, you know, we're here for the future, you know. And I keep thinking to myself, y'all, legit, I sit and I think to myself, I deserve a better world now, you know? So let's create that. We're gonna open it up for questions, so y'all. Hamid, do you want to take this part?
Sure. Just first of all, I want to thank everybody. This has been such an inspirational and a phenomenal conversation, and it's would love to just follow up again and again and again. um, and I just encouraging folks, if they can, if anybody wants to ask a question or has a comment, please post it in chat, or also you can raise your hand as well. But maybe I can start off with a question for all four of our panelists. That where do you see, and of course we're talking about elections, where do you see the whole national security police state that we live in? and the mega surveillance state that we live in. How do you figure that in the lives of particularly Black, Indigenous people of color, or queer, trans people of color communities as well, where the impact and just on the daily, how the stalker state operates. So, in the sense where surveillance and intelligence gathering and information sharing and the tracing and tracking and monitoring of our lives is a 24/7 piece. It's not, and we look at it not as an invasion of privacy. That's a very sort of a white privilege space to think of. We think of it more as an intent to cause harm, as an organized process of the state to engage in that kind of trauma and that violence. So yeah, whoever wants to respond to that.
Do you mind like shortening that question down? It was like so long. I'm like, wait, what?
The impact of the police state on QTPOC and BIPOC communities.
Q, Chanel, you were gonna say?
You can go first.
Oh no, I just wanted the question reframed just so that I like knew exactly.
Okay, well, I'm gonna just be honest. I'm not optimistic because society has been brainwashed to think that this stalker technology is good. They're like, oh, I feel slightly unsafe, so let me get a Ring doorbell. And I'm just like, but they literally contract with all of the PDs and they don't care about your privacy at all. And this has been happening over such a long stretch of time that people don't even know how over integrated the stalker state is into their entire system of life. And I'm thinking in terms of, queer, trans people of color, we over here needing to organize, and we can't do it as efficiently as we want to because we constantly have to be checking for like imposters and things, because you almost never know who's a cop unless you're around, unless you're, kind enough to be around people like the people in Stop LAPD Spying, who can show you how to freaking recognize when someone is not trustworthy, who can teach you about security culture. This world doesn't have a working knowledge of security culture, so they don't even know how to avoid these things. And it makes me feel very sad because people look at me like I'm crazy when I say you need to do this, not that.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. I think, I think that's kind of like one of the biggest where I'm like, it's like climate change and like the stalker state and how wrapped up even just me personally am in it. I'm like, we're fucked, you know what I'm saying? Because which isn't the best mindset, but it's daunting, right? You can even see how we looked at just this year and just the way that I'm seeing folks taking photos, really snitching, jacking, doing the work for them, right? And the different ways that at this point, I'm pretty sure signal is compromised. I'm sure, like it's, I feel unsafe in all ways in the things that I'm using to communicate. And yeah, I'm like, what are some, I'm curious in hearing some more, and definitely, I know y'all are doing a lot as well as Stop LAPD Spying. I think y'all have been a huge resource in terms of like how to protect and how to be aware of surveillance. But I don't see in general the best security culture that's been integrated into that. And so knowing, especially when it's, a diverse group, knowing if you have a lack security culture that you're putting the most impacted up to be surveilled. So I'm curious what other ways we can plan actions. We can let folks know where to meet us. We can, like, what are the ways? Do we leave notes? Like, do we just have to meet in person at this point? Because I do think that it's, just seeing how people are like, oh my gosh, it's unmarked federal agents, snatching up white girls in Portland or whatever. It's like, that's been happening, right? Like we've been seeing the police state snatching people up out of everywhere. We've seen Homeland Security, ICE snatching people up. We've seen the surveillance of, one another through these social media apps, through photographs, even if it's blurred, they can still do trace imaging. So yeah, I think that it's pretty daunting, and I'm curious to see the ways in which we shift and continue to build security culture in the work that we do, especially in the middle of a fucking pandemic when we're putting our lives at stake to be in the same room together. So it's just like kind of, yeah, it's daunting. But yeah, I think that it's tremendous. I think it's a tremendous obstacle that we need to figure, continue to figure out soon. I also
Celestia,
gotta
do you have
go. So much love, y'all. I'm like, damn, I want to stay, but I gotta go.
Thank you, Jade. Duende, you were gonna say something?
Um, yeah, what I want to say about the this monitoring that is happening is that um, there's this interesting discourse that's going on with certain indigenous communities of like missing and murdered indigenous women and creating a database for missing and murdered indigenous women. However, there are people who are scared of giving police and the government more like a database of indigenous people to begin with. And these conversations are happening around the Americas, not just in the United States, because the missing murder indigenous women is a borderless issue. Like in Colombia, we have the highest rates of assassinations of indigenous people, as well as Afro Colombians or Afro or Black Latinos in the Americas. Um, and so we're having that conversation, and we're also. I remember when Obama did DACA, where my family was like, "Oh, look, we can," or my friends, I should say, that were like, "Oh, look, we can finally go to school and things like that." But my mother was like, "This is a trap. They just want our information. They want to know who is undocumented in this country so that they can remove it afterwards and then have information on every single undocumented immigrant in the country." And then what happened? Trump became president after Obama, and now he had a whole database of who is undocumented, where do they live, where are they working, what school are they going to. And so there's a big fear with indigenous people of being monitored by the state. And this is not the first time this has happened, because the United States is well known to do this in places like Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, where the United States uses funding to monitor leftist movements that are happening in these countries. And once it gets to what they consider dangerous, they'll send in the paramilitary. And so I definitely do think that this is happening here in the United States as well, where every single activist in Ferguson was killed. All the Black leaders were killed because of this monitoring. They saw who were the leaders that were in the Ferguson riots, and then they started killing them. And it was kind of a scary thing for me to see every single activist or every single leader in the activist scene in Ferguson was being killed mysteriously.
Thank you, Duende. Celestia, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I keep thinking about how historically queer and trans people, queer and trans BIPOC people have like inherited tactics against the police state. Essentially, a lot of our struggle and our movement tactics have been, oh, the police are after us. So it's kind of like it's been really difficult for me to sort of think about what it looks like to create a system outside of that when it's literally it's in our inheritance. So I'm just wondering, like, we talked about how these online platforms are always being surveilled, no matter what. Even Signal, I think Signal wants to be purchased by Facebook, and once that happens, it's like it's over, and so I don't know. I kind of like also do feel a little bit unoptimistic in how to tackle the police state, considering that everything is surveilled. But I will say though, there's still hope to do it. I want to say that, in the sense that there are still queer and trans people, queer and trans BIPOC people that hate the state, and so I'm just here for it. Like, I'm here for it, and I'm gonna continue supporting them in whatever ways that they feel like is a way to counter the state.
Thank you. Thank you. And Celestia, I think you really, thank you for reminding us the capacity and to evade scrutiny and the big eye and constantly being surveilled. How do folks learn to navigate and survive? So definitely we could folks can learn a lot from that. So we have our hand up with Irina. Just let me just, Irina, go ahead and unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, hi. I wanted to bring up the issue of defunding the police. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, defunding the police or abolish the police. You know, personally, I mean, I think it should be reform the police. I mean, we need some police to, you know, so to have some order, but of course it needs lots of reforming. So I don't know where you guys, you know, where you guys stand on that.
I'm gonna open it up to see if anybody wants to address that.
I can. Well, as a coalition, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, we are abolitionists, so we believe in no policing. Policing started off specifically in the South, in the global South, as runaway slave catchers, and it has morphed into demonizing and criminalizing Black and brown people, whether that be Black men, whether that be Muslims, whether that be trans and queer folks that are just trying to survive, whether that be disabled folks that are just trying to survive, or even homeless. So we don't, as a way to think about defunding the police, there's more money going into policing these communities instead of helping these communities.
I understand you know, that there's lots of money going there and it shouldn't be going. But my question is that if there is no police, what is, how does, I mean, like, what were they doing before police was created? How were they keeping checks and balances, or, you know, I just want to know, how was
Sure.
the society functioning?
Yeah, so people are getting there. So
Yeah, I think the important thing is to think of, there are two different types. There's transformative justice practices, which looks at healing a community instead of criminalizing the community. So say someone does harm, right? It's not just going after them and punishing them, but it's what can be learned, right? Because everybody in a community is a valuable person and a valuable being in that community. So it's looking at them and looking at the person who perpetrated the violence and seeking to either restore it or change it so that it doesn't happen again, right? Anybody else can also jump in. I don't want to just
Janelle was
Yeah,
gonna respond
I-
to that. Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
was actually gonna also like just briefly comment, you
Please.
know, some of the things that we've talked about in this panel have been that essentially the state continues to create legislation that criminalizes Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, right? Sort of like then going off of to what Joy was saying, that people that migrated from different parts of the world, diaspora or more, were forced to come to the US or whatever that may be, ended up participating in like gang cultures and then deported. And then all these things essentially continue to be reproductions of violence by the state. And so if the state invested in things like, I don't know, sustainable healthcare, if the state invested in things like housing for people, if the state invested on things that would actually uplift low income marginalized communities, then maybe there wouldn't be as much violence. And again, it goes back to like, people would say, oh, but we need the police, but actually since the 1800s we haven't had anything but police. So how would we know if not having a police state would work if the state refuses to participate in that sort of like restorative process, right? And so I just want you to, I don't necessarily am trying to quote unquote change how you feel and how you think, but I'm more just sort of like offering you that if the state would do more for us, then maybe we wouldn't have to have police. That's just all I really wanted to say.
Chanel?
Okay, so
Just
all
one,
right.
one second, Irina. So I think Chanel had a response too. So yeah.
We haven't had police forever. They haven't been here for as long as there's been people on this planet, I swear. The indigenous cultures that were here before had a way of dealing with when people didn't agree and someone did something that was not right for the community. I know it's hard to see that as a reality that's possible, but most of the crimes that people are afraid of people committing, with the obvious exception of like rape, are literally done because people need something. So if our material needs are met by whatever means, if people are not starving or hungry or without something, most of the crimes that happen that get people locked up in the cycle of incarceration and thus put them on a path to not being able to sustain and survive after that, this wouldn't happen if society were not designed to not be just. If we bring about justice, you'll see a society without police where people are not in danger, because police do not actually stop danger. And I'll tell you this too. People are not inherently bad. I don't care what any vegan says. We are not inherently evil. And as such, you shouldn't feel that we can't have a world without police just because someone somewhere is bad. You should love your neighbor. You should try to think of the best of your neighbor. The whole give 99 and one excuses thing. Never mind. Random Islam. Let me shut up. Over.
Okay, I do want to answer this question. So in 2002, the Homeland Security was created. And then the following year, ICE was created in March 2003. When we talk about today about defunding ICE or demolishing ICE, these are the same arguments we encounter. Oh, how can we imagine a society without ICE or without Homeland Security? But it's a relatively new thing. Police, the police is also relatively new. Mind you, it is 200 years old, and it did start out with saying that, as Chela said, as a system to catch runaway slaves. However, we can see how other communities have demolished the police in their communities. So, for example, in Cheran, Mexico, the indigenous people there removed the Mexican state from their territory. They kicked them out. They said, no more politicians here. We're going to run things how we want to run things. And so in that department of Michoacan, it is the most dangerous, deadly department of all of Mexico, with the exception of Cheran. They managed to stop rape. They managed to stop violence in their community. How? By removing the police. And now it's not one of the most dangerous places. And so we have systems in the United States, or not systems, organizations that are trying to do the same work that this one community in Cheran had done, and which is to demolish the police. Here in South Florida, the Dream Defenders is doing the same thing. There is and I forgot where in Florida, but there's this one city in Florida that had managed to defund a prison, right? And they were able to pay off everyone's bail there through Dream Defenders. And so the United States is the number one in terms of prison population of, I think, the world. If not, I think El Salvador beats it. I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember the stats. We have to imagine society without criminalizing people. The United States relies too much on the labor of prisoners. Both my parents went to prison when I was a little kid. I was 1 year old. My parents went to prison in the United States. I was sent back to Colombia when I was 1 year old. Once my parents were in prison, 10 years later, they were out. My mom came, got me, and then we moved back to the United States in Miami. My parents, are good people. They're, they did mistake and they were in prison for it. And yet to this day, they're criminalized for it. Something that they did a long time ago. Something that was due to the drug wars policies that were enacted by Reagan. And so we have to, I understand that imagining a society without police is hard because it's been here for so long. It has. And I think it's unrealistic to expect people to just imagine it, because it's hard to see it when none of us have ever seen it, right? However, we can look at other communities around the world and how they're doing it, because this country is an anomaly when it comes to the prison industry. No other country does this except, well, maybe El Salvador does, but a lot of countries don't do this, right? So we need to look for examples. And indigenous people, and I know a lot of people have been throwing around that here, have been doing certain things like this. In my community, we don't have police officers in our towns because in our language that we have this word for police officer, which is auka, which means enemy, right? Because to us, the police, what do? They kill us. They kill us if we spoke our languages, because our languages were illegal in Colombia until the 90s. And so for us, we don't need that. You know, why are we going to have them in our towns? Because all they're going to do is criminalize us for things that we don't believe should be criminalized. And so for us, for me specifically, let me reframe, I'm an abolitionist, and I believe that we can create a society without prisons. And this is why in the United States, me and my family don't rely on calling the police, because the police, we know the police aren't going to protect us. My family's undocumented. Calling the police is going to put us in danger. And yet we managed to live our whole life without having to rely on the police. We know the police isn't for us. So there's already people in the United States that know the police isn't for them. So Black people, undocumented people who are aware that the police is not for them. So we don't rely on these systems. So I encourage people to stop relying so much on prisons as well, because other communities don't, to begin with.
Thank you, Dorinda. Any other questions? Anybody else has any comments?
I have a comment.
Give me one
Is
second,
everybody?
Ravana. Let me just see if somebody else has anything else.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so there's one comment. How does the group feel if I were to share notes that I took with this meeting with our social media followers? Yes, so there's a comment here. So let me just ask from Kariza that how does the group feel if I were to share notes that I took of this meeting with my social media followers? I was going to leave names out. If it's okay, can I mention that the meeting is by Stop LAPD Spying Coalition? So I see thumbs up on that, Kariza, but also to make it easier for you, I mean, this thing is going to be uploaded on the website by Friday, so people can watch the whole thing. It's on stoplapdspying.org, and I'll post the website address for everyone as well in chat. So it's your choice. But if you have taken the notes, hey, might as well send us a copy as well at stoplapdspying@gmail, so we can have a set of those notes too. But thank you very much. But definitely there's going to be a recording on there. Okay. Let's see if there's another comment. All right. Okay, so Irina, because it's 7:55, so if you want to make a quick comment, please just go ahead. Just a very brief comment, please.
Okay, well, in response to all this, I mean, I'm totally against ICE. I'm against the prison industrial complex. I'm against Homeland Security. It seems like you guys thought I support all this. No, I don't. I'm very upset the way they treat immigrants. But, you know, sometimes I feel like, you know, the police has to be there. For example, many years ago, you know, in the middle of the night, I used to live with my mother and she was not home. So I was all by myself in this house, you know, on top of the hill. And all of a sudden I woke up, I heard my garage door got opened. And that really freaked me out. I thought somebody's, you know, breaking into my house. So of course my reaction is to call the police. I mean, there are some situations, but I just want to make clear, I'm totally against ICE. I'm against, you know, Homeland Security, against all this prison stuff. So I think sometimes some police is necessary, but if you guys don't think so, that's okay. I mean, what would you do if somebody is breaking in your house? Can I get a response to that?
That's a very, they'll take a conversation. I think everybody has a response to that. So definitely.
Okay.
Yes. Because people spoke about restorative justice, transformative justice. People talked about communities coming together. People talked about lives being here before there was police as well. And I think maybe we know, historically speaking, that we know of and read about the world where there was no police and how communities were living together. But I think it'll be interesting to have a conversation about life with police and how we live it, we experience it. And if the LAPD being formed in 1869 and still 151 years later is trying to build trust in the community, then something is fundamentally wrong. So alternatives to policing exist though. So Chanel made a comment. The alternatives to policing as it is done now exists though. We promise it is not personal. Thank you, Chanel. So I just want to, it's 7:57. Chela, any last comment that you have?
So a few things. I know I know that it's late, but I would love to read my favorite poem from Audre Lorde. Can I do that? Give me
Please.
10 seconds.
Sure.
Um,
You want some background music?
no,
Okay.
I think I want this to be, yes. So Audre Lorde is a queer black um political activist and author, and she just was amazing. So for those of us who live at the shoreline, standing upon the constant ages of decision, crucial and alone, for those of us who cannot indulge the passing dreams of choice, who love in doorways coming and going, and hours between dawns, looking inward and outward, at once before and after, seeking a now that can breathe futures, like bread in our children's mouths, so their dreams will not reflect the death of ours. For those of us who were imprinted with fear, like a faint line in the center of our foreheads, learning to be afraid with our mother's milk, for by this weapon, this illusion of some safety is to be found. The heavy-footed hope to silence us, for all of us, this instant and this triumph, we were never meant to survive. And when the sun rises, we are afraid it might not remain. When the sun sets, we are afraid it might not raise in the morning. When our stomachs are full, we are afraid of our indigestion. When our stomachs are empty, we are afraid we may never eat again. When we are loved, we are afraid love will vanish. And when we are alone, we are afraid love will never return. And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive. Yeah, y'all, like this year has been a deadly year for trans Black women and trans women of color. And not just in America, but in all over the world, in Colombia and in Brazil and, seeing what's been rising up in Colombia. And yeah, just to let y'all know, this is also an announcement. I am organizing another takeover. I won't tell where it's going to be, but it's November the 20th. So if y'all want to get in touch with me and be a part of that, especially with my band, y'all know me. I love anytime I can perform. Yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank y'all for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you, Chela. Thank you. So folks, looking forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is the second Tuesday of the month. That is the war on youth. This is how young people are constantly being criminalized, by being demonized, and also, how they're now turning this whole language of criminalizing young people into a national security language of radicalization, of violent extremism. So just want to invite people for that. Keep a lookout. The second piece at the coalition, also keep a lookout, also is that we are going to be launching a campaign currently around because the LAPD is going to be coming back with its budget proposal for the fiscal year 2021-22. This last fight was for the upcoming fiscal year, which we are in. That typically happens towards the end of November. So keep an eye out. We've been filing extensive public records and doing a bunch of research and doing a deep dive just to expose everything that is going on. So join the fight. There's a whole bunch of working groups that are working on stuff. The data-driven policing, and then also the war on youth, and also gender and sexuality. So once again, I want to thank Chella just absolutely for Chella's leadership, their absolute phenomenal inspiration. And this was an amazing, amazing conversation. So thank you all very much. Be safe and have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye. Peace.